Alrighty then, well, then we'll move on to the next short story, which was Evolution. Well, it wasn't really a story. This was the Star Trek The Next Generation episode that we watched. And in this one, we're looking for like the meta text, novums, neologisms, all that stuff. So the novums here, these are going to be like the puzzling innovations. It's the nanites. You got to remember this episode was made in, I think it came out in 1989. So at the time, like, these things were a little more puzzling than maybe you see them right now. But the nanites are like the very small nanotechnology, like robots that kind of work with experiments and all that stuff. They help conduct experiments. And then the neutronium, which is, like at the time in 1989, that could have been kind of puzzling, but nowadays, like that, I guess that isn't too far in depth. So then the neologism, the newly coined word, would be the nanites here also, because back then that would have been something that nobody really heard of. Okay, so the specific characters, part of like the meta text, we have Wesley Crusher, which is the kid. He's the like intern that's working on the Starship Enterprise. And his mother is Dr. Crusher, so his mom is the one that's like in charge of like the experiments and all that stuff. She's doing a bunch of like scientific work on the Starship Enterprise. You also have Captain Picard, which is the captain of the ship, and then Dr. Stubbs, which is like one of the other health professions. And oh yeah, he's the professor that was visiting because they were going to. They're going to Cavis Alpha 4, which is like not so nearby planet, but that's where the Starship Enterprise is kind of going, and that's their main destination. But most of the story itself occurs on the Starfleet itself, the Enterprise. And so, like our main events here are like Wesley falls asleep while he's conducting the experiment with the nanites, and two of the nanites escape. So then later on, like the crew. He like goes to the doctors and all that stuff, tries to figure out a way to get the nanites back because he knows that it can be devastating with them out and about on the ship. So the crew discovers that the nanites have been replicating themselves inside the main computer, which is just terrible in their minds. So Dr. Stubbs tries to kill them all, but that doesn't really work for him. He's not really getting any farther. There's just too many of them. So eventually, Captain Picard, negotiates a deal using the main data system, which, like if you watch Star Trek at all, the data system and the computer are, kind of like the AI brains of the entire ship. So like, it's kind of like a co-captain with Picard, and to send them to Cavis Alpha 4. So like he negotiates a deal with them, and all the nanites come together, and they just like ship off to the planet that they're going to, and then order is restored. So some of like the concerns that this episode brings up ethically and politically are responsibility for one's creations and scientific pursuits. If you're a scientist or an engineer or anything and you're making something, you're responsible for whatever it is that you're doing. And that's where Wesley found himself. Like he was responsible for for the nanites getting loose during his experiment. And also self-replicating mechanical beings. Like this is more ethical and moral. If something replicates, then you're making copies of it. It's the same thing as like cloning. Like is it ethically and morally right to clone something? So that's one of the concerns that evolution is trying to bring up. So the STS concepts. Daniel's actually going to go over these in just a second more in depth. But you can see in this episode, technological momentum, definitely. You can see unintended consequences with the nanites. Like, Wesley didn't think that was going to happen, but you can see, like, with science, sometimes just unintended things occur. And lastly, like, value-laden technology. Technology is made for the values of, like, the scientists or the people that are going to be using them. And, like, the nanites were made for, the scientists to kind of mess around with and try and figure things out scientifically. So that's one right there.
Yeah, so on the technological momentum piece, obviously you start off with two nanites and they start to replicate and it gets out of control. To the point where like there's one scene where they started like messing with the atmosphere system or something and almost kills the entire crew. So that's like a change in technology's influence over society or group over time. Unintended consequences, obviously Wesley didn't intend for the nanites to get loose. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. In terms of value-laden technology, I think that the opening scene, or not the opening scene, when Wesley was actually conducting his experiment, he did it off of the premise that collaboration would bring about some kind of emergent properties, specifically with the nanites. They mentioned like when they were debriefing about like how the nanites evolved. Wesley said that his original purpose in like conducting this experiment was to see what happens when these nanites interact with each other and what type of work can they do differently as opposed to alone. So that kind of speaks towards human values in terms of like working together and collaborating, but then expanded to the nanotechnology that he uses.
And then right here, this is just kind of like an overview of everything that I just discussed. So, this is the thing, like if you want to take anything out, this is, the overview, the most important facts deep down. Like it's got the novums and the neologisms that are important, the characters that were important. So this is just one slide that kind of overviews everything, gives you everything you need to know about this episode.